Okay, in the last video for today, we're going to talk about this book called The Five Love Languages. Maybe you've heard of this. It's a book written by Gary Chapman. You could pick it up at Amazon.com or just at your local bookstore. But let's just go through some of the things that Chapman talks about when it comes to marital love. He says this: most of us enter marriage by way of the in-love experience. We meet someone whose physical characteristics and personality traits create enough electrical shock to trigger our love alert system. He says, but the euphoria of the in-love state gives us the illusion that we have an intimate relationship, but it was just sort of a short-lived thing for many couples. In fact, for many couples, it's just a couple of years, and once it wears off, now you're looking at each other saying, why did we get married again? He goes on, he says that once that experience of falling in love has run its natural course, we will return to the world of reality and begin to assert ourselves. And he says, little by little, the illusion of intimacy evaporates, and the individual desires, emotions, thoughts, and behavior patterns assert themselves. Maybe you've experienced this already if you're already married. And he says the couple falls out of love, and at that point, either they withdraw, separate, divorce, and set off in search of a new in-love experience, or they begin the hard work of learning to love each other without the euphoria of the in-love obsession. He goes on to say, we can recognize the in-love experience for what it was, a temporary emotional high, and now pursue real love with our spouse. That kind of love is emotional in nature, but not obsessional. It is a love that unites reason and emotion. It involves an act of the will and requires discipline, and it recognizes the need for personal growth. And that's what this book is about, is explaining how to have this kind of love, this love that requires discipline. He goes on, he says, that is good news to the married couple who have lost all of their in-love feelings. If love is a choice, then when they have the capacity to love after the in-love obsession has died and they have returned to the real world.
So let's get specific. Gary talks about the five main love languages, and this is the way every person, through his research and his time studying this, that there's five main ways people show and receive love. So let's just go through those quickly by way of information. So the first one is words of affirmation, which means you give affirming words of you're beautiful, you're handsome, you're smart. Saying even I love you are words of affirmation of making your spouse feel good about themselves. The next one is about quality time, spending time together. Not just sitting in the same room watching TV, but really spending time together. That is quality, not just quantity. Receiving gifts. This is the language of giving surprises to your spouse, buying special elaborate gifts, or just little things along the way. Acts of service is next. This is doing things, maybe projects around the house, taking out the trash, ironing shirts, is an act of service. And then the last one is physical touch, just being affectionate with one another. So these are the five main ways that, through his research, feels that every person falls somewhere in one of those categories as their main love language. You can have more than one, but usually there's one or two that are your primary. So let's go to the book and see what he says. Seldom do a husband and wife have the same primary emotional love language. We tend to speak our primary love language, and we become confused when our spouse doesn't understand what we're communicating. We are expressing our love, but the message does not come through because we're speaking what, to them, is a foreign language. Therein lies the fundamental problem. He goes on to say, once you identify and learn to speak your spouse's primary love language, I believe that you will have discovered the key to a long-lasting, loving marriage. Love need not evaporate after the wedding, but in order to keep it alive, most of us will have to put forth the effort to learn a secondary love language. Now, the book goes into much greater detail to each of those five love languages, and I think it'll be good for you guys as a couple to read that and really start to think what you think your own love language is. But let's fast track to really the main point of the whole book. It's not about you discovering just your own love language. The most important thing here is that you're learning the love language of your spouse and that you choose to love in the language that your spouse needs. So you have to think of it like English to Spanish, let's say, that if you're speaking English and your spouse speaks Spanish, You're not going to get very far in communication if you just keep speaking English and she or he cannot understand you. You have to be able to speak the language, the native tongue of your spouse. And that's the whole point of this book, to start loving in the language of your spouse. Now, some of you may have already read this book and you know your love language. And maybe others of you are sitting there thinking, I'm not really sure, I need to do my homework. So this is kind of a fun exercise. Take some time, figure out your love language, and then also try and take a guess of what you think your spouse's might be, and then have a conversation and share what you both came up with as far as your own love language. And then talk about some practical ways you could go about starting to speak that language. Because again, you have to remember that it may not be natural to you to speak in the language of your spouse, but that's the whole point, to start making that choice. Now, if you want a kind of a fast way of doing this, you can go here at the bottom, 5lovelanguages.com, and take like a 20-minute survey that can give you a quick response of what your primary love language might be. So we're done for today, and we look forward to you coming back next week to learn more about our principle number 2.